Evaluation of proposals, I will not stress out too much on this. You know that selection of core partners will be based on the classic Horizon 2020 call for proposals. You know that Horizon 2020 is a program that has already been launched. There have already been some calls in December and in January. So the evaluation will be totally transparent, run by independent experts. We will simply follow the same process with some minor adaptations in order basically to allow, you know, the structure of the public-private partnership to be considered specifically to the selection process. The main criteria for selection evaluation will be excellence, impact, and implementation. I know that these tell you a lot of things, but we thought that it would be interesting to give you some implementing criteria in order to allow you also to know a bit more in detail how the evaluators are going to assess your proposal. So you will find in the text of the call some implementing criteria. So for each of these, I would say, set of evaluation criteria, you will find some implementing evaluation criteria. So what we understand when we talk about excellence, impact, and implementation. So you will find all this information in the first call of in the first, I would say, in the first call fish that again will be launched around May or June. This needs to still to be seen. The evaluation, again, will be managed by the joint undertaking. Evaluation will be performed by independent expert that will be appointed by the joint undertaking. As a result of the evaluation, there will be a ranking list of entities that will be invited to negotiate. Negotiation is a very important stage of the process. Once you are selected, it's, I would say, not the end of the story, because negotiation, particularly in Clean Sky, plays a very important role. The selected applicants will enter officially a negotiation. We intend to have a big negotiation session in Brussels in order to have basically all the evaluation of the different strategic topics to be run in maybe 2 weeks' time. We will see how we will proceed in that side. What is important for you to know is that the negotiation will deal with very important aspects. First of all, there will be a detailed definition of the activities that will be delivered across the first series of activities. So you will have basically to detail and discuss and negotiate with us and with the leaders how you're going to deliver in the first series of activities in terms of deliverable, main milestone, technical description of the work package. There may be some recommendations from the evaluators, so you will have basically, where appropriate, to also adjust something in your proposal and to negotiate specific aspects with the leaders. This is really important. We know that it can take some time, but we need to try to make this process very effective and efficient, because we have got some performance indicators, so we will ensure that you will have time enough to negotiate, but we will have to make this process, I would say, quite limited in time. There will be, of course, definition of the roles, contribution. There will be, of course, negotiation on how to optimize the WBS. IP aspects normally are also part of the negotiation. You will negotiate these aspects. The JU will play a supervising sort of coordination role. Of course, you will have to set up a management structure with the ITD IDP. Once you are selected, you will officially become a member of Clean Sky. You will become a member of an ITD. You will become a member of a grant agreement where the leaders are already members and the other core partners. So this implies setting up an overall management structure that, of course, will entail negotiation with the other parties. Again, the result of this negotiation will be the signature of a grant agreement with the joint undertaking, and you will become officially member of the Clean Sky JU. You will have also to formally accede to the statutes of the joint undertaking. Now, about the eligibility criteria. We will not have specific, I would say, eligibility criteria. We will not depart from the rules for participation of Horizon 2020. The only specificity that I'm quite confident we will have is the so-called mono-beneficiary. What is a mono-beneficiary? It's a specific rule that we already have in Clean Sky. This allows basically also a single company, a single organization to apply to become either a core partner or a partner. So as you know, in collaborative research, the rule is that you need to have a consortium of a minimum of 3 legal entities from 3 different member states or associated. So we believe that the mono-beneficiary should be kept in Clean Sky 2 because it proved to be a major factor of attractiveness for SMEs, research organization, and also a lot of entities that never participated to European project before. So we got, so far, I would say, a pre-agreement from the Parliament and from the Council about this rule. So I'm quite confident that we will have, for sure, this rule into the rules for participation. So this is very important for you and your strategy, because now it's up to you to decide whether you intend to apply as a single entity, if your organization can meet the strategic medium and long-term activities. If you're not able to do that, and you believe that you can basically create more synergies, you can really bring together capabilities with other players on the market, you should apply as a consortium or as a cluster. So this is really up to you. What I suggest is that you try basically to have a medium long-term vision on the program. Once you will have a look at the joint technical program, you will have to understand whether it's really appropriate for you to apply as a core partner, or if you will see your organization to play more a role on the call for proposal for topics. Again, it's really a matter of strategy to apply as a single legal entity or as a consortium. Please do not consider the 10 million budget value of a topic as, I would say, a necessity for getting basically partners together with you and propose a consortium or a cluster. You should not simply sum up, I would say, commitment in order to reach the 5 million level. You should more, I would say, try to really make a strategy on the medium long-term objectives and not just summing up which is the commitment needed to apply as a co-partner. This is really important because we prefer basically to avoid applications that are quite strong in terms of showing which are really the synergies and capabilities that are going to be brought jointly, either by consortium or by a single legal entity. Very briefly, now I have to tell you which is going to be possibly the funding rate. You know that the main difference between FP7 and Horizon 2020 is quite important. You know that in FP7 you had the different funding rates depending on the legal status of your organization. If you were an SME, you could get a certain funding rate. If you were a large industry, you will get a different funding rate. In terms of indirect costs, there was also, I would say, a few options on the table. The difference in Horizon 2020 is that there will be a funding rate of 70 or up to 100% of direct costs, plus a flat rate of 25%. So since we are a public-private partnership, we are Clean Sky JU, the funding rate is still under review because we have basically to set a funding rate in a way as to match the 50-50 balance between the private contribution and the EU funding. So for the moment, what I can tell you is that we intend to set a funding rate applicable only to members. So this means that it is going to be a rule applicable to core partners. That will be a range around 70% of the direct costs. Take me with all the necessary legal caveats when I'm saying this. This is not official. This is still under, I would say, consideration by the joint undertaking. What I can tell you today is that we intend for the moment to have around 70% funding rate in terms of direct costs. Again, applicable to the members of Clean Sky. I'm talking here about leaders and core partners. In any case, the indirect costs is 25% of your direct costs. This is not going to be modified at all. We cannot, because this is going to be applied universally to all the research projects under Horizon 2020. So 25% of your indirect costs is going to be the major rule. Now let me get back to, I would say, my previous presentation when I was mentioning that we want to have strategic topic of a budget value of 10 millions. When we say budget value of 10 millions, basically we want to set a minimum threshold because we believe that core partner needs to be playing a major role in the program. They need to engage over a medium long-term activities. They cannot be basically any entity applying for a minor work package, just delivering work in 1-2 years. This is not what we want. This is not what we envisage for core partners. So when I say 10 millions threshold for topics, here you have basically to take into account the funding rate. If you are already thinking about how my organization should bring the in-kind contribution. Of course, as I said before, this depends on two main elements. The funding rate, so if the funding rate will be 70%, you will have to apply the 70% plus the 25 of indirect costs. But of course, it depends very much on the cost structure of your organization. Depending on the cost structure, the result on the 5 million minimum in kind may vary. It can be different. It can be for a certain organization more or less. It's a bit difficult to set a rule that may fit and match everyone perfectly, but we need to set a rule that will be applicable horizontally to the members, because this is the nature of a PPP. So again, if you have got some questions, please don't refrain from asking. I got 2 minutes to discuss.
No, 6.
6. Oh, okay. Well, okay. We have got some time. Clusters. Everywhere we go, we hear about some clusters, organizations that are basically willing to apply to become a core partner. Some clusters are already existing. Other clusters are under formation. So my, I would say, idea today is just to give you a few information, but also a few rules that are going to be applied if you intend to apply as a cluster. So first of all, I receive always this question that actually I like to revert to you, which is the main difference between a consortium or a cluster. Actually, for us, cluster is a grouping of entities wishing to apply as a single legal entity and perform joint work into the program. So the main difference between a consortium and a cluster is that in certain member states there is a cluster organization as such that is composed by different members. And sometimes the cluster exists as a specific legal entity. So this is basically the main difference that I can tell you about a consortium or a cluster. Now, what's going to happen? If you intend to apply as a cluster, like I think we will have the case in a few member states, you have to bear in mind that it's very, I would say, welcome to have clusters to apply. What is important for us is that we need to have a single contact point that is going to be basically the entity responsible in terms of being beneficiary and in terms of basically being a single contact point for the joint undertaking and the leaders. So the cluster will have to appoint a cluster coordinator that shall be the only legal entity acting vis-à-vis the leaders and the JU. If you're a cluster, we have to deal with one representative, with one coordinator that needs to take responsibility for its members. We cannot basically take the risk of have a core partner being a cluster, but then having to negotiate every single aspect with every single member of the cluster. This is going to be not basically applicable in Clean Sky. This is very important for you to consider if you intend to apply. So the cluster coordinator should be very clear from the beginning who is going to be. The cluster coordinator is the entity that will submit officially the proposal, will negotiate, will sign the grant agreement, and will have to take all the operational, financial, and management responsibility of the cluster as a whole. So cluster coordinator is vis-à-vis the JU, the one which is responsible for all operational, management, and financial aspects. We need to have one counterpartner, which needs to be basically our main contact point and single responsible. In case of, let's say, in terms of delivery of the work, we need to ensure that the cluster coordinator is the one that will be responsible for ensuring that the work is delivered. And of course, we'll have to manage all the operational aspects within the cluster members. What we expect from a cluster is not a single, it's not a separate set of delivery from the different members. We want to have one delivery in terms of objectives, and we want to have one single entity to be responsible for delivery of the work. This is extremely important because you have to deliver on time, you have to deliver and meet the objectives. In case there are some, I would say, problems, we need to have basically one person that needs to be the responsible vis-à-vis the GU. Of course, in terms of payments, this is another question that I always receive. The cluster coordinator should be entitled to manage all the payments. When I'm talking about payments, I'm talking about operational payments on the project, but also the fees that the cluster will have to pay to the joint undertaking. You saw that, you know that to become a member, once you become a member, you will have to pay a very limited amount of running costs of the joint undertaking. It's not a big deal, it's not a big amount of money, but it's important that the cluster coordinator will ensure full centralization of this process. Again, depending on the structure of the clusters at national level, a joint and several liability regime shall be demonstrated in the proposal where this is applicable under, I would say, the legal structure of the cluster under national law. So what is important for us to know is that if according to your national law, the cluster organization is not a legal entity which is by default responsible and liable, you will have to show basically that there is a joint and several liability regime. This is very important because we cannot, I would say, accept an application and then enter into negotiation and then find out that the different members of the clusters do not agree on the joint and several liability. This will just basically be a waste of time because we will not be able to sign the grant agreements. Now, just to give you a couple of, I would say, examples on clusters, 2 minutes. Very simply, you have two possibilities. There are cases where you have a cluster organization that exists already as a legal entity according to national law. It's an entity that is able to sign contract, and then I think this is the perfect scenario. This is the optimum case. You have a cluster organization signing with us and taking all responsibility. Fair enough. There may be cases where the cluster or the consortium cannot be represented by an organization able to sign contracts on behalf of its members. In this case, we will have to go and assess the financial viability of the clusters, but also of the members of the clusters. Unfortunately, because you don't have a single legal entity, so we have to run this, I would say, administrative and financial process at the joint undertaking level. As a result of this process, we may basically sign the contract with the cluster as an organization, but again, provided that you can show that you have a joint and several liability regime. These are two scenarios that, as far as I've seen, are applicable in different member states that we have been visiting in the last months. Different options on the table. Please have a look also at the Horizon 2020 model grant agreement. This is important because our model grant agreement is under preparation. We will not be able to publish our model grant agreement before a couple of months. So for the moment, have a look at the Horizon 2020 model grant agreement. If you want to understand more about liability regime, what is going to be the effect for you on the basis of the Horizon 2020 rules. Last but not least, few recommendations, but I already mentioned this before. The composition, the management structure, and the functioning of the cluster from both operational and financial capacity point of view needs to be explained into your application because, again, this is going to be basically what the experts are going to be looking at, and will be also a point that will come back during the negotiation. So clusters will have to make sure, final message, that the combining capabilities of the individual members will definitely result in an organization capable to execute the activities in an effective and efficient way. With these slides, I terminate my presentation. I'd like to show you this disclaimer that is quite important because everything we are saying today on Clean Sky 2 is to be considered only as a preliminary information. So all this information are not legally binding. As a legal officer, I have to tell you this. Our aim is to publish on the website constantly updated version of this PPT. There you may find an evolution in the slides, but again, this is really to allow you to prepare your proposal and to be constantly updated on the work in progress. Thanks for your attention. I think now the floor is to the public for questions.